Network to the world. Subscribe now to the Hot 97 YouTube channel. It's Ebro in the Morning with Laura Stiles and Rosenberg.
Ebro, Laura, and Rosenberg. Today's guest, a colleague of mine, an author. He does something for MIT. Oprah was showing him love. He's got a new book out. What is it? Is it A Letter to the Sons of Society? He put out a book in 2016 that got a bunch of awards and critical acclaim, righting my wrongs. Give it up for my guy, Shaka Senghor, one time on the program. How you doing, sir?
I'm blessed, man. Thank y'all so much for having me, man. Excited to be here.
Nah, man, it's a pleasure to have you. If people don't know you or know about your story, you spent most of, all your 20s in prison, where you were charged with a murder. You were in solitary confinement to come home and write books and become the man we see today. Anything you want to add to that story, because you've done a phenomenal job of engaging with young black men around the nation and sharing your story and the mistakes that you made.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I went to prison in 1991 when I was 19 years old and spent 19 years in prison, 7 of those years in solitary confinement. I was really fortunate to meet some mentors in there, these older brothers who were serving life sentences. And they really just, guided me to books and poured into me in a real way. And that kind of led me down the pathway as a writer, as a mentor, as a critical thinker. And I was released in 2010. And in that time period, I've done everything from being a fellow at MIT Media Lab to teaching at the University of Michigan, to becoming a top tech exec in Silicon Valley. And of course, my favorite thing, which is writing, man. So this is my second big book. I'm really excited about it, and the response has been incredible so far.
I think one of the interesting pieces, a lot of times people assume when we hear stories like yours that, you come from poverty, or, you come from beginnings that, were very troubled. But you're from a semi-middle class family in Detroit, but the home was abusive. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the city of Detroit. My dad was in the Air Force. He also worked for the state. My mom was a homemaker. But we had a very difficult household. And so I ended up running away when I was about 14 years old. Honor roll scholarship student. I used to dream of being a doctor. And unfortunately, I found myself seduced into the crack cocaine trade. And, I spent from 14 to 19 up till I went to prison, kind of in and out of the streets. I was successful in my endeavors there. But unfortunately, tragedy struck when I was 17 years old. I got shot multiple times, standing on the corner. And then 16 months later, I shot and tragedy caused a man's death. And that, led to me being incarcerated. And, it's one of the things I share my story freely, because I think a lot of these things are preventive. And I hope to encourage other people, when they're raising their children, to think about the impact of what happens in the household and how that can lead a child who has great potential out into the streets.
It's almost like what I hear you saying, not almost like, but specifically what I hear you saying is that parental accountability and parents having the tools and the awareness to know what their behavior is doing to impact their children and create this potential spiral that could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think parents are the most influential people who will ever be in a child's life, for the good or for the bad. And, honestly, over the years, I've been able to really understand my mother and what she experienced and, how she showed up in our lives, as well as understand my dad. This book is actually inspired by letters I exchanged with my dad while I was incarcerated, because I wanted to get to those deeper truths, like how did our household become what it was? And, I learned a lot about both of my parents. They were really kids having kids, something that we don't talk about enough in our community. My mom had her first child when she was 16, and my dad, met my mom when she already had 3 children, and he was 21 years old, fresh out of the Air Force. So, I have a lot of grace from my parents, a lot of forgiveness, a lot of tough conversations. But, I think it's important for parents to understand, like, how their behavior, whether it's physical violence, whether it's the absence of affection, how that impacts their children, and what the long-term consequences could potentially be.
What advice do you have to someone who is struggling to forgive their parents for their shortcomings?
Yeah, my advice is always to go back and think about, first of all, the age that their parents had them, and think about where they're at if they've reached that age yet, or if they've surpassed that age. It's just a big difference. When I think about my mom and my dad, they were, teens and young, early 20s. And I'm like, what do you really know about the world? And especially trying to raise, at that time, I was their fourth child. They ended up having a total of six. And, I just think, grace is really important, but also being intentional about having those conversations. They're difficult. Sometimes it's hard to talk to my mom about the past. My dad has been a little bit more open, but, there's a lot of grace and a lot of freedom and forgiveness, like holding on to, the hard parts of life, man, makes life really unpleasant.
We keep hearing that, yo, Rosenberg, Laura, we keep hearing that word grace a lot these days, right? A lot of people throwing around grace out here.
Absolutely.
Grace is important.
I'm not quite sure everybody knows what it means. The other day when I asked you two what grace meant, because Rosenberg, you used it in a conversation, you didn't have the definition. We had to look it up.
No.
Yeah, but it's just about being kind to yourself, kind to others. Like, just follow it with some kind of understanding. I think you made a good point, Shaka. I think as we grow older, we understand that our parents never had all the right answers, that they were just trying to figure things out the best way that they can with the tools that life handed to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to make the distinction between excusing behavior and being able to explain behavior. I think
Right.
there's still some accountability, and that's one of the things I really respect about my dad is he was able to stand in it when I just really confronted him about some of the things that I wish would have been different. And as a man, he was able to step up and say, hey, there's things that I didn't get right, but I've always been present, and that made a world of difference in our relationship. And with my mom, it was a little bit more difficult, but I think we finally got to a space where there's healing happening. And at the end of the day, we only get one life. So I just try to show up fully in all aspects of it, even in the areas where it's kind of hurtful.
How did you get on the radar of the Oprah Winfrey's and a lot of the people who have really embraced your story? Can you share those relationships with us and how they were built?
Yeah, absolutely. So with Oprah, it's really interesting. I have a motto of how I live my life. I believe that you talk into existence the things that you desire most. I think it's important to write them down. So when I first started writing, I was in solitary confinement, and I wrote down a list of what I wanted to happen with my work. And honestly, at that point, they told me I wasn't even getting out of prison, let alone get out of solitary. But I believe in the laws of attraction, and so I started writing down these very grandiose wishes and desires for my career. And I wrote down, if I'm gonna take this writing thing serious, that Oprah has to read one of my books, because to me, there's no greater bar set than if she read a book, it means that it's really about something. And so I wrote that down. Fast forward, I got out. I started hustling books out of the trunk of my car. I know we hear a lot of talk about people who got it out the mud and who hustled, but I really, the first thing I did when I walked out of prison was sold a book in the parole office parking lot, and I've been selling books for 12 years straight. But what happened with the Oprah thing is I was at an event where I spoke at, and I had sent my books ahead of time. It was like kind of an old hustler tactic of like, let me get these books to these people, because it was an incredible room. George Lucas was in the room, Melody Hobson, and a few other notable people in different industries. And there was a woman there who took the book to Oprah. Initially, Oprah refused to read the book. It was self-published. It was kind of a grittier cover. But eventually she decided to read, and she got 50 pages in and was like, I want to interview this guy. And so she invited me on an episode of Super Soul Sunday, came out, did the episode. We were supposed to interview for about 45 minutes. We ended up talking for about 3 hours. And she went on to say it was not only one of the best conversations in her career, but it was one of the most important she's had in her life. And her and I became friends after that, And so, I've been able to work with some incredible people. I recently worked with Nas. I heard y'all talk about, which rappers was Rapper of the Year. I'm giving that
Double
crowd
XL Awards. We was going through what they just announced.
Yeah, and I mean, Lil Baby is killing the streets for sure. But I got a chance to work with Nas on his last album. And all of that is manifestation. Like I believe in writing it down, visualizing it, but then you got to take those steps toward it as if you own it, and then if you're worthy of it, And so I think the more I've opened up to the idea of what I'm worthy of, the more things have shown up for me in my life. And it's all about putting forth that effort. Of course, you got to have the talent. Like that's a whole other thing. So I work at the craft. I when I started writing, I didn't want to be one of the best writers for someone who had been in prison. I wanted to be one of the best writers, period. So I take the craft serious. I study the great writers across every genre. And I think I think when all is said and done, historically, I'll be labeled amongst the greats.
Letter to the Sons of Society, you said was inspired by letters that you wrote to your father. This book is available now. What else is in the book?
So this book was inspired by my dad, who wrote me for 19 years. And the actual book cover there's real letters from my dad embedded in the cover. But this is a book to my two sons. And the way that it originally started is I had this idea of writing to the sons of society. So I mentor a lot. I work with young brothers in the hip hop industry. I go inside juveniles. I go inside the prisons. I'm on the streets. I'm on the block. And originally I was like, letters to my hip hop sons and letters to my entrepreneurial sons. And then I realized between the worlds of my two sons, my oldest son, Jay, who was born 6 months after my arrest and who grew up while I was in prison, and my 10-year-old son, Sekou, who is a young entrepreneur.
Yeah, he's got a business. He's selling T-shirts, making beats.
Yeah,
Yo, he moving out here.
Man, he's an incredible little whiz kid, But I felt like between the world of my two sons is really all of our sons. And though it says to the sons, what I found in the response, I mean, the book came out last week and the feedback is bananas right now. But it's really resonant with women. It's resonant with mothers and daughters and, uncles. And the men are showing up for this book, which has been incredibly inspiring because it's a book of vulnerability. It's emotionally honest. It's aspirational. I do affirmations with my son, which is what inspired my youngest son, Sekou, which is what inspired his business. And so, it's just a powerful, powerful, beautiful and poetic book that speaks to, the messages that our sons need to hear from dads.
I also think too, we work in hip hop, so and around the music and talk to artists, so we get to sit with black men in that are at some of the highest heights of creativity in music, using words and wordplay and all this sort of thing. So we get to see black men in this light for what we do for a living. But I think I don't think everybody has an appreciation for what is done in hip hop. So for you to be doing it in literature, I think opens another door to where a black man from our generation like yourself that went through what you went through is showing the world capabilities that sometimes they don't accredit to black men.
Absolutely. And that's something that's really important to me for people to really recognize, like, we've contributed greatly to the literary canon. When you think about James Baldwin, you think about Alex Haley, you think about so many of the brilliant writers that shape the world and how we see it, and one of the things I really appreciate about hip hop is it inspires me as a writer. My people always like, who is your greatest inspiration as a writer? And I'm like, Rakim, Nas, like the great artists that really understand the intricacies of word and how to deliver, but also how to wrap messages in entertainment. I think it's just such a powerful and beautiful skill set that we've underestimated and undervalued because of the immediate nature of it being right in your face. But I think, it's an opportunity right now for people to really understand, like, we're writing about stuff that's meaningful, that's personal, really intimate, but it's also dope the way that we approach it. Like, when Nas invited me to write a piece for a song, that spoke to the appreciation for how I show up with words. And so my thing is I want to see more brothers reading, more brothers talking about it. And what's really cool about this right now is I'm seeing that, like, the brothers they really into this book, bro. It's incredible to see that,
I also think that, because where the art comes from, society, and this is, I think, worldwide, when it comes from the street or it comes from somebody who was incarcerated or It comes from a low income lifestyle. These are places where society tries to ignore the individuals that come from these places and not give their intellect any credence or value. And I think that when it shows up the way you show up, or even someone like Nas or a Hove shows up, it reminds everyone that there's genius everywhere if given a chance to grow. You know what I mean? And even if not given a chance, like they say, what is the Tupac rose from concrete? What is the
Yeah.
the poetry? Even if it's not given a chance to grow, when it does succeed, people want to celebrate it. I think our society has the habit of throwing people away, though. Like, we're ready to throw people away right away. And it's beautiful that someone like yourself can continue to bring these conversations to the forefront.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I think intelligence is truly the most gangster thing you can do. Is the more you learn, the more you can do in the world. And when I think about my story, when I walked out of prison, they told me I would be back in prison in 6 months. And initially, I was like, "Yo, you tripping? Like, that's foul to say on the way out the door." But 70% of people go back to prison. But what I've done since then has been, nothing short of amazing for them and a miracle to them. But I felt like this was always here. I was always intelligent. I was an honor roll scholarship student. Whenever I got on punishment, I would just read the encyclopedia. So I'm kind of good at Jeopardy. But I was a fellow at MIT Media Lab 2 years after I got out of prison. I've taught at the University of Michigan, where I co-founded a class with a professor named Ashley Lucas. That class has been taught for going on 7 years now, and I still drop in and do a lecture every semester. And I've spoke at universities all over. I've been on, TED. I spoke at TED, at the main TED conference, Google Zeitgeist, you name it. And when I think about how we even communicate intelligence, we've kind of ridiculed people for being nerdy or being smart. But I'm as street as it get when you think about my history and my past. But I'm also able to move in spaces now. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a tech executive at a company called Trip Actions. We currently have a $7 billion valuation. And, for anybody to understand the tech industry, that's not a small feat to accomplish, and to be there as one of the only black tech execs at this, in the C-suite. It speaks to how important intelligence is and how intelligence translates to currency, since that tends to be what we talk about a lot in our culture. And I appreciate, I love all the aspirational, get your bag, get your money. But it's a different level of money when you attach intelligence to it.
Absolutely. Shaka Senghor, get the book, Letter to the Sons of Society. It's always great to see you. And thank you for joining us too, man, and reaching out. And before we let you go, for anybody on the come up out there, how do you balance, okay? Because hearing your story is one thing sparked in my mind. How do you balance the fine line between being assertive and a go-getter and being annoying? Right? Because you was hustling your book out of the trunk, and you created these fruitful relationships. And I come across people all the time that they may have something good, but they just don't have the other aspects of the I guess the social skills part of it. You know what I'm saying? Did that come because you were a hustler in the street and you was around and you knew how to move?
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up in the streets of Detroit, it's a different beast, and it's part of our culture. Is a very hustler-oriented culture, but it's really about building relationships. I've always been a great relationship builder, but it doesn't stop there. I can't tell you how many people hit me up and they're like, "Yo, I got this book or I got this thing," but it's not finished. They haven't put the work in. They haven't taken the time to develop the craft fully and to really actualize their talent. And then the other part, sometimes it's an unfair sense of entitlement for something somebody else has worked hard for. I think it's important to honor those relationships, honor people who create platforms and space, and be respectful when you show up and, hey, I got a product I want to talk about, but make sure the product honors a person's time. Like, I value your time, so I'm not going to hit you up like, bro, I got this half finished product. I'm going to be like, I got this heat and it's real. And if you, really feeling what it is, then let's do something. But I think it's persistent, self-belief, understanding that you are worthy of all the things you want, being a little bit patient. I didn't get here overnight. It's 12 years of hustling to make it to these spaces, and I'm still growing. I try to grow every day. I work hard every day. I mean, I'm in LA right now at a little bit after 6 in the morning, and I went to bed at about 2 in the morning. You know what I'm saying? So, and I got a regular job that I do in tech, but it's really how much you want it and how hard you're willing to go, but also being able to, develop those more professional skills and relationship building skills.
Shaka Senghor, thank you for your time. Great to see you, sir. Congratulations, man.
And absolutely, man. Salute to y'all and thank y'all again for having me. Truly appreciate y'all.
Thank you very much, man.
Congratulations.